It's April 1978 and punk rockers The Clash are playing at a big concert in Victoria Park in the East End of London. The Rock Against Racism gig was meant to be a show of strength against the far-right National Front.
First and foremost, it was the first political act that I ever did. The first thing I ever did was to go on a Rock Against Racism march. The things that I saw that day really changed the world for me. They didn't change the world literally, but they changed my perspective of the world.
Then, aged 20, the future singer and political activist Billy Bragg was in the crowd that day.
When I got into the park and saw 100,000 kids just like me, I realised that although I was in a minority in the office where I worked, I wasn't actually in a minority in my generation. And in fact, we were going to define ourselves, my generation, by our stance against discrimination of all kinds. As the previous generation had defined themselves against the Vietnam War, we were going to define ourselves in opposition to discrimination of all kinds. And so when I went back to work on Monday morning, I knew I was not in a minority. And since then, I've always tried to live my life in a way that's in some ways the groundwork was laid in Victoria Park.
The concert was organised by left-wing music fans like Roger Huddle, who wanted to bring together musicians from different races and different styles. They hoped to show that tolerance was not only more fun than the racism of the National Front, it also had the best tunes.
We thought the NF was everything that we know about what fascism is. It was the destruction of all democratic forces. So it was a serious fight. And I think that we also had to stand up and say, we are together. So from the very beginning, our slogan was reggae, soul, rock and roll, jazz, funk, punk, our music. And we made a real point of saying that the only thing that the NF had to offer the young people of England was the marching band and the military music of old England. And we was for a multicultural England. And I think that was the key difference as well.
And a cooler England. And more...
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of just attitude, the way that we dressed, the way we walked, the way we talked, the clubs, etc. It was all part and parcel of being a multicultural and proud of it, working class youth.
The plans for April the 30th, 1978 were the movement's most ambitious yet. Rock Against Racism would hold a carnival in central London, a march to Victoria Park, and then a concert featuring big reggae stars like Steel Pulse and big punk bands like The Clash. The turnout exceeded all expectations.
The steel bands and rock groups made for a carnival, but the message was political, that the National Front were no different from the Nazis and should not be accorded the same rights as other political parties. Over half the crowd were teenagers, reflecting perhaps the extensive campaign groups like the Socialist Workers' Party has waged in the schools against the National Front.
I wanted to go on the march because I worked in an office with a bunch of guys who were 5-10 years older than me, and in their language they were casually racist, they were sexist, they were homophobic. And I knew this was wrong, but I never spoke out, I never said anything about it because I felt I was in a minority. So going on this march, for me, was a way of standing up and being counted for this idea that I believed in.
What were the banners like? What were the chants?
Oh, the chants were great. I mean, everybody had to go on the megaphone. National Front is a fascist front. Smash the National Front was quite a popular chant. You know, black and white, unite and fight. Those kind of ideas. You still hear some of them.
The marchers were half expecting trouble when they passed through the East End of London. The poorest part of the city had once been a recruiting ground for the 1930s British fascist leader Sir Oswald Mosley.
Once we got out past Liverpool Street and we struck out into the East End proper, there were a few places where it was expected the National Front might be waiting for us. The police escorted us all the way through. There was one little boozer somewhere up the Bethnal Green Road where there was an old fella standing outside with a beer and a fag and a flat cap giving a Nazi salute. And I thought, you know, that could well be one of Mosley's old black shirts, sort of standing, trying to hold back this huge tide of multiculturalism that was seething by and realising that, you know, it's over for him.
The march was a big success, but Roger Huddle didn't know this at the time. He was waiting patiently at the concert venue in Victoria Park, wondering if anyone would turn up.
At 12 o'clock, there was a guy walking past with his dog. There were 3 kids with their bikes looking up at the stage, and that was about it. And I introduced X-ray specs, And she was giving her all to it, and she was singing, and there was no one in the park. And then she started her second number, and the clouds broke, first sign of sun for a week, and the demonstration arrived. And suddenly, from 3 or 4 people in front of her, there was 80,000 in front of her. And the park just filled. And as they came to the front of the stage, they immediately went into this completely mad punk dance, the pogo. And they was just all leaping up and down in the mud. And they went for the front fence. The whole front fence collapsed. All our security went to pieces. Everybody was having a great time. People started fainting. We didn't know what to do. We carried them out to the back and laid them out on the side of the empty swimming pool. The music was playing. And then this wonderful St John's ambulance man came walking up. He must have been in his 60s or 70s, grey-haired, with that satchel that the John's ambulance wear. He says, "Do you need any help?" And he stayed for the rest of the day helping these heat-exhausted kids who were laid out around the empty swimming pool just to bring them back, and then they would jump back into the dancing. So it was kind of surreal and magic at the same time.
By now, Billy Bragg was dancing away with the rest of the crowd.
Top of the bill was a guy named Tom Robinson. Then he was a recently out gay man, and he had this incredible song called Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay.
Sing if you're glad to be gay. Sing if you're happy that way. Hey, sing if you're glad to be gay. Sing if you're happy that way.
When he began to sing it, all the blokes around where me and my mates were standing started kissing each other on the lips, which was a bit strange to us because I'd grown up in the East End of London and I'd never encountered an out gay man, and I couldn't understand it. And when we turned around, we was kind of more or less stood in front of this big banner that said "Gays Against Nazis" or "Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay" or something like that, which would probably been marching behind us and then just kind of come into the park behind us and stood there. And my initial thought was, why are these gay geezers at this march? It's about black people. And then sort of didn't take long for the penny to drop to realise that actually, you know, this wasn't just about racism. This was about all different kinds of discrimination, and in some ways that just being different was what annoyed the National Front. And so I wanted to be with the different people. I wanted to be one of the different people.
Once Tom Robinson had finished his set, Roger Huddle could finally relax.
It wasn't until everybody had gone that suddenly the feeling was just ecstatic. It was the best partner of beer I've had in my life, when all that planning, all that organisation had come together. There is an argument that everybody is a racist deep down, so therefore you can't do anything about the NF because really they're expressing what you believe. We prove that that's not true, that people are not racist. In fact, quite the opposite, they're anti-racist. And that those people who can be swayed can be pulled our way. It was that feeling of some kind of triumph over the misery of what Nazis meant, that triumph of the music. Behind stage it was a bit hectic, but in front of the stage it must have been quite magic.
After the concert, Billy Bragg moved on stage himself as a performer and organiser of political concerts. The Rock Against Racism movement dissolved 3 years later, but its ideas were revived in 2002 by a new generation of music lovers.